Okay, CPCTC stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so what does that mean? Okay, remember how before we talked about what corresponding meant? And I gave you guys the example of sometimes when you're watching the news, they do that split screen where they show the newscaster in New York and the newscaster in LA, and they call that person in New York the correspondent. It's because that person in New York does the same job in New York as the person in LA, right? And so they have the same position as far as what they do. So remember, this word corresponding, okay, this basically means like we're looking at angles that are in the same position, or you could think of them being like the same place or the same location, okay? And so all this is saying is that these angles that are in the same positioning, when you have a congruent triangle, they have to be congruent, like the parts have to also be congruent to each other, okay? Which you'll kind of get a better understanding when we go over this diagram here, okay? So when you have triangles and they're telling you that they're congruent, they're going to give you something called a congruent statement, okay? So this right here, this is called a congruence statement. Okay? Now, the congruent statement is super duper important, okay? And the order of the letters matters. Okay? Because what the order of the letters in this congruence statement is telling us is it's telling us which angles match up and which sides match up. And if the triangles are congruent, then the angles that match up are the same size, and the sides that match up are also the same size. Okay? So, if we're given a diagram like this, and we're given a congruent statement like this, what we can do is we can look at the congruent statement so that we can label the congruent parts in the diagram. Okay? So like I was saying, the order of the letters is really important. So what's the first letter in this triangle? X. And it's congruent to what's the first letter in this triangle? So angle X is congruent to angle N. So I can find angle X and I can mark it with an arc. And I can do the same marking on angle N because the congruent statement told me that those are corresponding parts. And because it says here the triangles are congruent, their corresponding parts have to be the same size. So angle X is the same size as angle N. So which angle would be the same size as angle Y? P, because that's the second letter, right? Both of these are the second letters. So let's mark those congruent. Angle Y is the same size as angle P. Okay, and then which angle would be congruent to angle Z? Q, because look, Q is the last letter also, right? Now, someone in the last class asked me, well, Miss Miller, why did you mark X with one arc instead of marking it, bless you, instead of marking it with two arcs? Well, I just chose one arc to start with. I could have marked this one with two and this one with two, but then I couldn't mark that one with two. Then I have to mark that with something different, like 3 or 4 or 10 arcs. I mean, you could use however many arcs you want, but it takes a long time to write 10 arcs. So that's not really a good choice. Does that make sense? Okay. What's that?
You just mark the arcs just to tell the difference.
So to show that this angle X is the same as angle N, they need to have the same marking. It doesn't matter which marking I choose. I could have chose 2 arcs or 3 arcs, but they both have to have that same thing.
You can't do the same.
And if I chose 2 here, could I choose 2 for this one also? No, not unless I'm told those 2 angles are congruent. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the problems here. It wants to know angle Z is equal or congruent to which angle up here? Okay, well let's look at what we marked. Okay, angle Z was congruent to angle what? Q, okay? All right. Now we went through and we marked all our angles, but now it's asking me about some sides. Okay, now did I mark anything on the sides yet? So let's mark some of these sides congruent before we get too much farther, okay? So here's how you do that. You look at the two letters of the side, for example, X, Y. If I'm going to mark this side congruent to another side over here, the letters X, Y are the first two letters. So what are the first two letters over here? And P. So I would mark that one congruent, right? Okay, and then if I wanted to mark YZ in the diagram congruent to something in this triangle, look at where YZ is. YZ is the last two letters. So what are the last two letters? PQ. And then finally side XZ, those are the first and the third letters. So what are the first and the third letters? NQ. Okay. So now, when I go to write the congruent side for YZ, YZ was here, it had two marks. I need to make sure that I write these letters in the right order. Because I could call this side QP or I could call it PQ. But I want it to be in the same order that it is here. So look back at your congruent statement. What order is it in? YZ,
PQ.
and then what?
PQ.
PQ. Okay? Does that make sense why I did not call that side QP? I mean, I could call it QP, but you want to keep them in the same order when you're talking about them being congruent, okay? All right, so let's look at angle P. What was angle P congruent to? Angle Y. And angle X. Angle N. Okay, now, side NQ. Okay, look back up at your congruent statement. Which ones? XZ, so that's the order, right? Okay, and last side PN. Okay, yeah, so Y then X, right? I look back at my congruent statement to help me. Okay? All right, are there questions there so far? No? Okay. All right, so let's take a look at the next part. Okay, in the next part, it gave you another congruent statement, and it gave you a bunch of information about these sides and angles. So we're going to use our congruent statement to help us mark things in our diagram first, and then we're going to work through those problems. Okay, so let's look at that congruent statement. LMN, triangle LMN is congruent to triangle CBA. So which angle is congruent to L? C. Mark it on your diagram. Okay, which angle is congruent to M? B. Okay, those are already both marked with a right angle, so I assumed already those are congruent, okay? All right, and then angle N congruent to what? A. So mark that on your diagram. Okay. So now we're going to go through and answer these questions. Should I maybe mark the sides first, though? Let's do that. LM, that's this side here, is congruent to what? CB. So those. Okay, and then MN, is this one, congruent to BA. And then last, LN. CA, right? So LN with CA. Okay? Now, sometimes, depending on the diagram, it's very easy to see like which sides are congruent. Okay? But you can't always make that assumption, and you guys will see why in the diagram below, the next diagram we do. You have to go based off the congruent statement, because sometimes the diagram is not always drawn to scale, and what you think looks congruent might not necessarily be corresponding, so it might not be congruent. Okay. All right. So let's find Z. Okay, where do you guys see Z's? Two places, right? You see here with the right angle you have a Z, and here over with this side. Does that mean I'm supposed to put these equal to each other?
No.
Does this angle equal this side? Is this side 90 degrees? Is that even how we measure a side? No, okay. So I see that this side is congruent to this side, but am I going to be able to solve an equation if I set these equal to each other? No, okay. I see this angle is equal to how many degrees? Could I solve that equation? Yeah, okay, so let's set that up. This expression, 7z plus 6 is equal to 90. Okay, you guys solve it right now. Okay, so you guys should have got 12. All right, let's look at the next one. We want to find y. Okay, where do you guys see y's in this problem?
2y minus 12.
Okay, that side. Where else?
5y.
This is a side. This is an angle. Are we going to set those equal? No. Okay, this side is congruent with this side, but we talked about we're not really going to be able to solve that equation yet, right? Or we could just say this one equals how much? 90. Okay, that's probably easiest, right? Okay, so you guys solve that really quick. Okay, what'd you guys get? Okay. All right. Okay, next, let's look at, we want to find the measure of angle L. Okay, angle L's up here. It's congruent to angle C. Is there any information about angle C? No. Do I have enough information about all the angles in this triangle to find angle L? What do all the angles in this triangle add up to? 180. So let's add 90 plus 30 plus the missing one. Is it okay if I call the missing one L? Okay, so 90 plus 30 plus L equals 180. So you guys solved that. Okay, so what did you guys get for that one? 60. Okay, and remember, we actually found the measure of an angle, so it needs to be 60 what? Okay, all right, let's take a look at the next side, ln. ln's over here. Okay, it gave me a value here already. Did I already find y? Could I just substitute that value in? Okay, so ln. Okay, so find ln, please. Did you guys get it?
Yes, 24.
24? Now, is it degrees?
Oh, no, sorry.
No. We don't actually know the units for the length, right? Okay, let's go to the next one. We want to find x. Okay, so look at where's your x in the problem? Right here. Now, do I know information about this angle and its corresponding part? Look at its corresponding part. How big is it?
30.
So if these two are corresponding angles, what can I do with them? Equal them. Okay, equal them to each other. Set them equal. Okay, so everyone go ahead and solve for x. Did you guys get it? 3? Okay. All right. Okay, and then the last one, side AC. Let's look where that one is. Do we already know how long its corresponding part is? Which side is congruent to AC in the other triangle? LN. Did we already find the length of LN?
Yeah.
What was it? So this one has to be what? Okay. All right, are there any questions on what we did with those problems right there? Okay, right now in your groups, you guys are going to take a look at the bottom, and you're going to label the diagram with the correct markings for which corresponding parts are congruent. Now, there's a typo in the diagram because the letters, not in the diagram, but in the congruent statement, there's a typo. These letters don't even match at all. Okay, so here's what I need you guys to write down. triangle QRS is congruent to triangle JKL. Alright, and what I want you to do is just label your corresponding angles and your corresponding sides using arcs and tick marks. Okay, and then after you guys are done, if you finish, compare what you get with your neighbors in your group, and then we're going to go over it. Okay? Here we go. So, what's angle Q congruent to? J. What's angle R congruent to? Okay, what's angle S congruent to? Okay, now, what about side QR? What'd you guys mark this one congruent to? JK, right? That one. Okay, what about side RS? What'd you guys mark that one? KL. And then last one, QS? Now, order matters. QS? JL. Yeah, let's get in the habit of saying the order right. Okay, good. All right, so there's our congruent markings for that diagram. Okay, any questions on that? All right.